I never imagined that day would be the last day I would see her as my wife. There had been something strange in his eyes the last few weeks, something I couldn't decipher. But I trusted. I trusted blindly. Maybe that was my biggest mistake. I always believed that, after so many years together, no one could invade what we built. The nights were peaceful, the kisses were routine, the words were sweet, and I, like a fool, believed that that was enough. But it wasn't. It never was. She thought she could fool me, that her lie would go unnoticed. Maybe he thought I was blinded by love, distracted, incapable of perceiving the subtleties. And for a while, I really was. I closed my eyes to the small signs, ignored the messages exchanged late at night, the excuses for long meetings, the unexpected departures. There's always something we don't see until it's too late. Until that day. I remember the cold feeling that ran down my spine when I found the evidence that changed everything. It was a message, simple but devastating. Something as mundane as, "See you later," but which carried the weight of an open secret. It was as if, in that instant, everything fell apart. And it fell apart. She didn't know I found out. Her every gesture, every smile she gave me, seemed like a cruel irony. She had no idea that I knew every detail, every lie. As I pretended everything was fine, anger grew inside me. I watched her from afar, calculating the right moment to act, to confront her. But no, it wouldn't be a simple discussion. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of an ordinary fight, of an explosive confrontation where she could defend herself with her false words. I would surprise her. And I did. I prepared everything meticulously. A divorce letter, cold and impersonal, waited for her. Signed and sealed with the same indifference she showed for our years together. When I placed her on the table that morning, I saw her expression slowly change. First, confusion. Then, a subtle panic. "What is that?" she asked, her voice shaking. I could have said anything, I could have thrown all the evidence against her right then and there, but I preferred to just watch. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" The question left my mouth like a knife cutting through the air. The silence that followed was suffocating. She tried to disguise it, make excuses. As if there was any possible explanation for that. I didn't listen. My mind was already elsewhere, far from the woman I once loved. In that moment, she stopped being the wife I shared a life with and became just a stranger I needed to leave behind. But I didn't stop there. It wouldn't be a simple divorce. I wanted her to feel, in every way possible, the impact of the betrayal she committed. She lived on appearance, her reputation was her greatest asset. So I destroyed that too. With a simple click, I shared everything. All your charade, exposed to the world. The truth about who she really was. I let the consequences crush her as I watched, impassive, as what once seemed like a perfect life fell apart. As she desperately tried to salvage the pieces of her reputation, I felt a strange sense of justice. It wasn't just about the marriage she had destroyed, but about all the lies she told, the promises broken, the trust betrayed. The pain she caused me, now she felt it on her skin, multiplied. Now, the question that hangs in the air is, how far was she willing to go to keep her secret? Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they reveal something very real, the destruction that betrayal can cause in people's lives. Get ready to dive into an intense narrative, where secrets and lies will have devastating consequences. Now, sit back, relax, and prepare to hear a shocking story. The morning started peacefully, like any other. Daniel looked out the living room window, coffee in hand, observing the flow of people outside, rushing about their own lives. He always had a very organized life, and this was a reflection of his meticulous personality. At 42 years old, Daniel had built a solid career at a highly prestigious marketing company. He was known for his dedication and problem-solving abilities. Work had always been her refuge, a place where the rules were clear and the results predictable, unlike how she felt in her marriage lately. Mariana, his wife, was his opposite in many ways. An artist by nature, she has always lived with lightness and spontaneity, traits that, in the beginning, attracted Daniel irresistibly. Mariana brought color and movement to his life, something that, for many years, he considered essential to maintain a balance between the stress of work and the peace he found at his side. However, there was a growing distance between them. Something subtle, but present. Mariana's easy laugh seemed rarer, and her conversations, previously full of enthusiasm, were limited to everyday trivialities. The apartment they had shared for over 10 years was spacious, with windows that let sunlight flood every corner of the room. It was a place they chose together, a refuge in the middle of the city that represented, until recently, everything they wanted in a home. However, to Daniel, that house was starting to feel like a prison, full of uncomfortable silences and empty moments. He has always prided himself on being a logical and rational man, but lately, uncertainty has haunted him. Mariana spent more time outside the house. She claimed to be involved in new artistic projects, exhibitions and events, which, for Daniel, was understandable to a certain extent. He always supported her in her career, admired the passion she had for her art. However, there was a growing disconnect, something he couldn't explain. In recent months, she seemed more distracted, distant, and when they were together, her gaze often wandered, as if her thoughts were always somewhere else. That feeling of discomfort was new to him. Daniel has always been a self-assured man, especially in relation to his marriage. They were the ideal couple in the eyes of many friends and family. Mariana, with her captivating smile and free soul, and he, with his solidity and stability. They seemed the perfect balance between reason and emotion, between the practical and the artistic. But something was changing, and Daniel didn't know exactly what it was. He just felt that his life, which before seemed so controlled, was slipping through his fingers. The nights were no longer the same. Mariana's body, previously so close to his in bed, now seemed distant, as if the heat between them had gradually faded. He wondered if it was just the tiredness of routine, the years of living together that wear down any relationship, or if there was something more. He tried to push these thoughts away, repeating to himself that he was just being paranoid, that the natural wear and tear of a long relationship was normal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. That morning, while drinking his coffee, he looked at the empty chair where Mariana should have been sitting. She had left early for a work meeting, as she had mentioned the night before. Daniel frowned, feeling that nagging twinge of doubt again. He was beginning to wonder if the life they led was still the same, or if it was all just a facade to keep up appearances. Mariana, on the other hand, was also lost in her own thoughts as she drove through the busy streets. Art had always been her escape valve, and recently, it seemed to be the only thing that still kept her connected to what she considered essential. Marriage to Daniel had been a choice of love and security. He was everything she needed, or at least thought she needed. But the restlessness inside her grew every day. She loved Daniel, or at least she wanted to believe that, but something was missing. Something that made her question her choices, her decisions, and the life she had built with him. The conversations between them had become formal, almost mechanical. Daniel, with his methodical and predictable routine, no longer surprised her like he used to. What was once a comforting quality now became a barrier, something that suffocated her. Mariana missed something that she couldn't even describe. Maybe it was the desire for adventure, for newness, or maybe it was simply the realization that life was passing by too quickly, and she was trapped in a reality that no longer satisfied her. She parked her car in front of a cafe where she used to meet other artists. It was a place that represented everything she loved: freedom, creativity, interesting people to share ideas with. But that morning, she felt torn. Part of her wanted to run away from that predictable life, and another part clung to the idea that her marriage could still be saved, that maybe it was just a difficult phase, like so many others they had overcome over the years. At the same time, Daniel, still at home, leafed through the newspaper without actually reading the news. His mind was far away. He couldn't ignore the growing feeling that something was wrong, deeply wrong. The image of Mariana smiling differently, the coldest touches, the brief kisses, all of this tormented him. He remembered how she used to look at him, with admiration and affection. Now, it seemed like those looks were reserved for someone else, though he didn't know who. Daniel sighed, closing the newspaper and looking at the clock. Time seemed to drag by. He was determined to solve whatever that restlessness was that was gnawing at him inside. There was something hidden, and he needed to find out what it was, but he didn't know where to start. His mind, always so logical, was lost in a tangle of assumptions and fears. Mariana, his Mariana, was moving away, and he didn't know how to bring her back. The invisible tension between them continued to grow, without one or the other knowing exactly why. It was like a rope that, every day, stretched a little more, ready to break. The days passed slowly for Daniel, while the feeling that something was out of place only intensified. He tried, in vain, to reconnect with Mariana, but each attempt seemed to encounter an invisible barrier. The conversations, previously light and fluid, were now short and filled with a tension that he didn't know where it came from. Even on the nights they were together, the bed felt like a divided space, two distant bodies. Something was broken. Daniel was a practical man, always used to dealing with problems rationally. But how do you face something you can't touch, something that hangs in the air like a shadow? The discomfort grew, and the doubt began to transform into something more. He didn't want to think the worst, he didn't want to believe that Mariana, his wife, could be hiding something so serious. But at the same time, he felt like he was losing control of his own life. Meanwhile, Mariana, immersed in her hectic routine, tried to ignore the internal conflicts that were eating away at her. She was involved in her artistic projects, but not even art, which had always brought her peace, seemed enough to silence the voice of guilt that whispered constantly. There were times when she would look at Daniel, sitting on the couch with a book in hand, and wonder how things had gotten to this point. The love that was once so clear now seemed like a distant memory. It was on a cold afternoon that everything began to take shape. Daniel had left work early, decided to do something different, try to rekindle what they seemed to have lost. He wanted to surprise her, he would prepare dinner, something simple but symbolic. He believed that maybe, with a little effort, they could reconnect. On the way back home, he stopped by a wine store, bought Mariana's favorite, and then at a flower shop, picking up a bouquet of lilies, the flowers she loved most. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the anxiety that was growing in his chest. Everything would work out. It had to. When I got home, the apartment was silent. Mariana had not yet returned from another of her artistic commitments. Daniel began to prepare the environment, set the table with care, opened the wine to breathe and was satisfied with the simplicity and beauty of the scene he created. He looked at the clock, wondering how much longer it would take. So he decided to take a look at social media and pass the time while he waited for her. It was there, at that moment, that Daniel's world began to fall apart. While scrolling his cell phone screen without much interest, a notification appeared, something he didn't expect. A message from a mutual friend, a simple comment on a photo in which Mariana appeared. "You guys look beautiful together," the text said. The phrase caused him immediate discomfort. When he opened the photo, his heart stopped. It was an image of Mariana, smiling, next to a man Daniel didn't know. His arm rested comfortably around her waist, as if it were natural. She smiled at the camera, carefree, as if she was completely at ease in that situation. The place seemed to be a charming cafe, one of those places where she used to go to meet other artists. But what bothered Daniel most was not their closeness. It was the look in Mariana's eyes, a shine he hadn't seen in a long time. Something she no longer reserved for him. Daniel's body froze. His heart beat heavily in his chest, and a mixture of anger, pain and disbelief took over him. He closed his cell phone tightly, trying to reason, trying not to rush, but the evidence was in front of him. The woman he loved, who he believed he knew deeply, was involved with another man. He felt the betrayal like a knife piercing his gut. Everything they had built, the years together, the shared dreams, all of it now seemed like a lie. Not knowing what to do, Daniel got up from the table he had prepared with so much care and began to walk around the house, as if looking for a solution, something that could give him immediate answers. But the only answer he found was the image of Mariana in the arms of another. How could she do this? What happened to them? He thought about confronting her immediately, picking up the phone and demanding an explanation. But part of him knew this wasn't the time. He needed to see it with his own eyes. I needed to be sure. It was then that an idea formed in his mind. He knew where Mariana used to go when she said she was working. Having decided, he took the car keys and drove to the location. The journey seemed longer than normal, every minute in traffic was an eternity. His mind wandered between disbelief and fury. The image of Mariana and the unknown man repeated itself in her head, increasingly clearer, increasingly painful. Upon arriving at the cafe, he parked on a nearby street and got out of the car, feeling the cold air hit his face. His hands shook slightly, and he tried to take a deep breath, to control the explosion of emotions that consumed him. He approached the place, looking through the glass, and there she was. Mariana, sitting at the table, the same man in the photo next to her. They were talking intimately, and the way he touched her hand made it clear what was happening. Daniel leaned against the wall outside, trying not to lose control. There, in that moment, he knew that everything he feared was real. Mariana was cheating on him. Daniel stood there, outside the cafe, motionless, with his gaze fixed on the scene unfolding in front of him. Mariana, the woman with whom he had shared more than a decade of life, was sitting relaxed, laughing and talking to that man. The man who, until a few days ago, he didn't even know existed. The casual touch of hands, the knowing glances, it all seemed so natural. As if it were already part of a routine that didn't belong to him. Daniel's mind was in chaos, but a strange clarity guided him. The pain of betrayal was deep, visceral, but something bigger was coming. He needed to confront her, needed to hear from her what was happening. Maybe, deep down, there was still a foolish hope that it was all a big misunderstanding, that she had an explanation that made sense. But every time he saw that smile she gave the other, that hope died a little more. He took a deep breath and entered the cafe. The sound of the bell over the door attracted Mariana's attention, and she immediately froze when she saw her husband standing there, a few meters away. His smile disappeared, and his eyes, once bright, now showed a mixture of fear and surprise. The man next to him also noticed the discomfort and moved away slightly, as if he felt something serious was about to happen. "Daniel," Mariana began, but her voice trailed off. She didn't know what to say. Daniel, however, was no longer willing to listen to empty excuses. "Is this where you spend your afternoons now?" Daniel's question came with a cutting coldness. He kept his gaze fixed on her, ignoring the man beside him. Mariana tried to say something, but the guilt was visible on her face. She knew she had been discovered, and she knew there was no longer any way to escape. Daniel, always so predictable, always so confident, was now on the verge of an emotional breakdown. She could see it in his eyes, the pain, the betrayal. It wasn't supposed to be like this," said Mariana, getting up from her chair and walking towards him, as if trying to reduce the physical distance that separated them, as if that could somehow erase the emotional abyss that she herself had felt. Had created. And how was it supposed to be, Mariana? Cheat on me, have fun with another man and then go home as if nothing had happened? Daniel's voice rose a little, control starting to slip. He had always been calm, rational, but this situation pushed him to the limit. Each word seemed to weigh tons, charged with the venom of weeks of suspicion and mistrust. The man, realizing that there was no place for him in that conversation, discreetly picked up his things and got up, trying to leave as quickly as possible, but Daniel intercepted him with a look. "Are you going somewhere?" "I think you should stay and listen to this," Daniel said, almost like an order. The man hesitated, but, given the tension in the air, he chose to follow the command. He sat back down, but was visibly uncomfortable, as if he were trapped in a scene that didn't belong to him. Mariana looked at her lover, her face overflowing with a mixture of shame and fear. She knew Daniel wasn't the type to explode into physical anger, but his control and coldness now scared her more than any shouting or violence. "You don't understand, Daniel. I was feeling alone," she said, her voice trembling, trying to justify the unjustifiable. "We were growing apart, and he was just there when I needed him most." Daniel laughed bitterly, a dry, cruel sound. "Alone? How can someone feel alone in a marriage of years? So many days, so many nights together, and now you tell me you were alone. Was loneliness your excuse for this?" He gestured to the man, who now had his head down, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mariana didn't have an adequate answer, because, deep down, she knew that there wasn't enough justification for what she had done. She looked at her lover, but he too seemed at a loss for words. He was just a piece of something bigger, something she herself had destroyed. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to maintain control. He knew that exploding there, in that cafe, wouldn't change anything. The pain was there, burning inside, but there was something more important to be done. There was an even greater revelation, something that Mariana had no idea he knew. "You thought you could live two lives, didn't you? One with me, and one with him," said Daniel, his voice low, but carrying an intensity that made Mariana shudder. "He thought he could get on with it and I would never find out." Mariana shook her head, denying it, but Daniel continued. "You were wrong." He leaned in a little, approaching her, his eyes fixed on hers. "I discovered everything, Mariana. All. And not just what's happening here." Mariana's face turned pale. She knew there was more to that speech than just the betrayal he had just witnessed. He knew something she hadn't mentioned yet, something she feared more than anything else. The air around them seemed to have become heavier, and the tension was almost palpable. Daniel walked away, looking at the man next to him, who now seemed even more lost in the situation. He wasn't the only betrayal. There was something much bigger than that man sitting at the table, something that Daniel knew would change their lives forever. He had something prepared, something that would destroy everything Mariana had tried to keep secret. "But this is just the beginning," Daniel said finally, with a calm that didn't match the whirlwind of emotions he clearly felt. "You'll see." And with that, he turned around, leaving the cafe without looking back, leaving Mariana and her lover paralyzed, not knowing what was coming. Betrayal, at that moment, was no longer the only problem. What Daniel knew, and what he planned to do next, was what truly haunted her. Daniel left the cafe with firm steps, but the weight of emotions pressed him. The cool afternoon air offered him a kind of solace, a brief sense of control amid the chaos his life had become. He didn't look back, there was no need. What he had left inside was a part of his life that would never be the same again. Mariana was lost in her own choices, and he knew that the impact of that betrayal would echo for a long time. Daniel's mind was racing. What happened next wasn't just about marriage or infidelity. It was something bigger, a key piece that Mariana didn't yet know he had discovered. He had told the truth when he mentioned that he knew everything, but that everything he knew was much more devastating than she could imagine. There was the man, of course, but there were also the consequences of her actions, consequences that Mariana had clearly underestimated. As he walked back to his car, Daniel reflected on the past few weeks, the pieces starting to fall into place. He wondered at what point she had become so distant, at what point she had started to hide more than just the extramarital relationship. The physical betrayal, as painful as it was just the surface. The real blow would come with the revelation of the secret that Mariana thought was safe. Inside the cafe, Mariana remained motionless, her gaze lost in the space where Daniel had been moments before. The man next to her murmured a few words, trying to offer some comfort, but she barely heard him. Her world was falling apart, and the sense of control she believed she had was completely gone. She tried to organize her thoughts, understand what had just happened, but the only thing that kept going through her mind was Daniel's warning, "I figured it all out." What did he actually know? Betrayal, of course, but there was something in his tone, a certainty that made Mariana shiver. She knew Daniel wasn't the type to speak in vain. If he said he knew, then he really knew. His heart quickened as he thought of the consequences. It wasn't just the case with the man sitting next to her that could destroy everything, but the secret she held so deeply. Something she had tried to forget, something that, if revealed, could cause even more damage than the adultery itself. "Do you think he'll come back?" the man next to him asked, his voice full of uncertainty. Mariana finally turned to face him. His gaze was distant, almost unfocused. "No. I don't know," she replied, without conviction. "I don't know what he's going to do." The man shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the heavy silence that hung between them. He knew he was no longer part of that story, he knew his presence there was now irrelevant. Mariana was alone at that moment, facing the consequences of her actions. Outside, Daniel got into the car, his hands still shaking. He started the engine, but remained still for a few seconds, breathing deeply. His mind was on fire, buzzing with all the possibilities that moment presented him. He could end it all at once, expose not just the betrayal but everything else. But part of him, the part that still remembered the good times they had, was hesitant. He loved Mariana. This feeling didn't disappear so easily, even with the betrayal displayed before his eyes. There was a fine line between the desire for revenge and the pain of seeing the person you loved sink completely. He knew that by revealing the secret, he would be destroying not only what was left of their marriage, but also Mariana's own life. The question was he prepared to carry this burden? To be the one responsible for ending it all? These thoughts haunted him as he drove through the familiar streets. Anger still consumed him, but along with it came sadness, a deep melancholy at the loss of something that, for a long time, was the center of his life. He knew that nothing would be the same as before, and the decision he would make in the next few hours would be final. Mariana, now alone, got up from the cafe. She also knew that that day would mark the end of everything she knew. Her feet automatically carried her back to the apartment she shared with Daniel. Each step felt like it weighed a ton, as if the gravity of her choices were finally bearing down on her with full force. Upon entering the apartment, he found the table set, the flowers and the wine, all prepared with the affection that Daniel was still capable of showing, even in his last moments. The contrast between that scene and the chaos in his mind was brutal. She felt tears burning her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not now. She knew Daniel would return at some point, and when he did, she would need to be prepared. But deep down, she knew nothing would prepare her for what came next. Time seemed to pass strangely. Minutes dragged by like hours, and Mariana could no longer bear the growing tension. She stared at the door, waiting for the sound of Daniel's keys, the sound that would signal the start of a conversation she dreaded more than anything else. Every time the clock on the wall ticked, she wondered if she should leave, run away, avoid confrontation. But where? To the man with whom he had cheated on Daniel? He was part of the problem, not the solution. Finally, the sound she had been waiting for and dreading at the same time came. Daniel entered, calm on the outside, but with a hurricane inside. He looked at the set table, the irony of it all hitting him hard. Mariana, standing next to the table, stared at him in silence, as if she were about to be judged. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just walked to the table, pulled out one of the chairs and sat down. Mariana knew that that silence was not a sign of peace, but the prelude to something much bigger. "I know you're afraid of what I might do now," Daniel began, finally breaking the silence. And you're right to be afraid. Mariana felt a chill run down her spine. But you still don't understand the gravity of what's really happening, he continued, his voice firm but filled with obvious pain. You still don't know what I discovered. The tension in the air intensified. Mariana knew she was about to face something much bigger than betrayal. Something she, until now, believed was safely hidden. The final confrontation was near, and whatever Daniel had in mind was about to be revealed. Daniel remained seated, facing Mariana, while the weight of silence enveloped the apartment. Mariana, nervous, could barely stand, with her hands shaking, trying to find a way out of the situation she herself had created. The betrayal, which before seemed like the biggest problem, now seemed small compared to what he was about to reveal. I discovered a lot more than just your case, Daniel began, voice low but firm. I thought you deserved to know that while you were playing with my trust, I was tracking your messages, your dates, and your biggest lies. Mariana turned pale, knowing exactly what he was talking about. Her breathing quickened, and reality set in with all the brutality she had feared. You knew that sooner or later this would come to light, didn't you? What did you think, Mariana? That I would never discover the embezzlement? That the fact that you were using my company to cover up your scams and your encounters would have no consequences? Mariana's heart seemed to stop. She had used her closeness to Daniel, her access to his business, to hide a series of illicit transactions, all to support her new lifestyle and the whims of the man she had become involved with. Mariana thought she was in control, that she could manipulate Daniel's finances without him noticing. But he noticed. And now, everything was falling apart. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. I knew there was no justification. Not after all. I've always trusted you, Mariana, Daniel continued, his voice filled with hurt. But you took advantage of it. You not only betrayed me emotionally, but you also destroyed everything I had built with so much effort. And why? To maintain a life of luxury with someone who didn't care half as much as I cared. Mariana collapsed in her chair, unable to support the weight of guilt. The man she was involved with had begun to demand more of her, more money, more gifts, more of the life she and Daniel had built together. And, at some point, Mariana started stealing from her own husband, thinking he would never find out. Daniel stood up slowly, the pain showing in his gestures. I could destroy you right now. Expose everything, the betrayal, the theft, the fraud. But I won't do that. Not to spare you, but because I want you to feel what it's like to lose everything little by little, just like I felt. He walked to the door, grabbing his coat. You're going to have to face the consequences of your actions alone. I'm leaving the house today. The lawyers will take care of the rest, and as for what you did to the company, the lawsuit will be opened soon. You'll be judged. You'll lose all. Mariana, astonished, finally spoke, Daniel, please listen to me. I did everything wrong, I know, but I never wanted it to get to this point. Let me explain. Explain what? That you chose money and lies over our marriage? That you traded love for greed? Daniel interrupted her, his words cutting like razors. I loved you, Mariana. More than you deserved, apparently. And now there's nothing left. Don't try to convince me of anything. It's done. With those words, Daniel left the apartment, closing the door behind him. Mariana stood there, motionless, with tears silently streaming down her face. The weight of what she had done, and the consequences she would now face, fell upon her with full force. She was alone, both literally and emotionally. The man with whom she had cheated on Daniel was nothing more than an opportunist, someone who, upon realizing the risk, would disappear from her life as quickly as he appeared. The silence in the apartment, which she once craved so much when she was next to Daniel, now seemed suffocating. Mariana had nowhere else to run. And for the first time, she understood that her search for something more had left her with nothing. Everything she had done, every wrong choice, every lie, culminated in that moment. Days later, the consequences manifested themselves in a brutal way. Mariana's lover disappeared from her life, taking with him any trace of what she thought had been a meaningful relationship. Public shame arrived with force, as the case against her became known to everyone. His reputation was destroyed. Friends, family and colleagues stayed away. There was no one left to offer support. And she, once so sure of her choices, was left at the mercy of her own ruin. Daniel, after leaving that apartment, felt a mixture of pain and relief. The pain of betrayal, of lost time, of destroyed trust, was there. But along with that, came the feeling of liberation. He was no longer a prisoner of a marriage based on lies. For the first time in years, he could rebuild his life, this time, with truth, with dignity, without the weights that Mariana had placed on his shoulders. He knew the journey would be difficult, that overcoming the pain would take time, but he also knew he had a second chance to find something genuine. He never imagined it would end like this. A marriage that, for so long, was the pillar of his life, was now nothing more than a pile of painful memories. But in the end, Daniel found strength in his decision to move forward, without looking back. And now, I want to know, what did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more intense stories like this. Here, we do not support any form of cheating. We want to show how it can destroy lives and relationships, bringing to light the darkest side of human choices. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any new stories.